right, let's now bring in former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, thanks so much for joining me on the U.S. Report. I want to get your thoughts, first of all, on this devastating plane crash in Washington, D.C. And it seems like from the outset, the left have decided to start throwing political charges at the president that somehow his hiring freezes and other things like that could have been responsible. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, I don't think it passes the smell test, right? I mean, the president was inaugurated, what, 10 days ago? Not even 8 days ago, the 20th. So we're literally 10 days in. No one took a job or lost a job in the last 10 days that was because of the Trump administration. And frankly, the more we find out, I think the more that we're probably going to see that it was Pete Buttigieg and his handling and his lack of leadership as Department of Transportation Secretary that really comes into focus here. I mean, Pete Buttigieg was probably the worst cabinet pick. You think about every aspect that he was in charge of, our railways, our seaways, our airways, our highways. There wasn't one area that didn't have a major crisis under his tenure at the Department of Transportation. He was really good at running to the cameras to take credit when he thought it was advantageous, but he always hid from crises. And look, I will tell you, having been part of President Trump's team and in the White House, I think the president, there was a reason that he was focusing on the FAA and Pete Buttigieg's leadership and priorities. It's sad, but, you know, I pointed this out about the Department of Agriculture a couple months ago, right after the election. You go to these home pages of the agencies and the departments throughout government under the Biden administration, and their priorities weren't their mission, right? In the case of the Department of Agricultural Food Safety or the Department of Transportation, you know, the safety of our transportation modals. In fact, they talked about diversity and equity, inclusion, and that's like, that shouldn't be the priority of any of these departments. If they want to make it number 15 while Dems are in office, whatever. But it really just showed where the priorities were the last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard somebody once say that Pete Buttigieg was such an incompetent transportation secretary that Americans actually knew who the transportation secretary was, which I think is a position you don't want to be in at all. But I also want to move on to... By the way,
just, you know...
Oh, yeah.
We talk a lot about nominations and qualifications. I wrote a book, my second book out, where I noted, actually it's my third book, Radical Nation. And I wrote a chapter on a bunch of the qualifications of some of the Biden nominees. Pete Buttigieg was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And this is not a joke. Absolute truth. We went back and looked at the number of buses that he oversaw as mayor, and it was 66. That somehow qualified him to be the transportation secretary. 66 buses were part of the South Bend, Indiana bus fleet. That was his, and it showed, because every area that he was responsible for as Secretary of Transportation had a crisis where he failed.
It was, and we all remember that too, with the train crashes in Palestine, Ohio, and places like that, and crises at the ports. Yes, absolutely, 100% utter incompetence, and I think that reflects exactly what we had over the last 4 years, and I think, unfortunately, we're still dealing with some of the hangover from that. But I want to move on, though, too, because also you were a former press secretary yourself, and I feel like you are the perfect person to ask about this. There's a new sheriff in town in the White House press briefing room, Carol Levitt, and I want to just play this little comparison between her and her predecessor, the late Karine Jean-Pierre.
When you're up here in this briefing room speaking to the American public, do you view yourself and your role as advocating on behalf of the president, or providing the unvarnished truth that is, not to lie, not to obfuscate to the American people?
I commit to telling the truth from this podium every single day. I commit to speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. That is my job. And I will say it's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing policies that are wildly popular with the American people, and that's exactly what this administration is doing. It's correcting the lies and the wrongs of the past 4 years, many of the lies that have been told to your faces in this very briefing room. I will not do that. But since you brought up Truth Seek, I would like to point out, while I vow to provide the truth from this podium, we ask that all of you in this room hold yourselves to that same standard.
How do you think she's going? I think she's a real breath of fresh air, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I tweeted it out. Caroline retweeted it, as a matter of fact, but I just said, what a breath of fresh air to have a press secretary who has two things that the last one didn't. One, real information, when it came to answering people's questions. And two, and this is equally important, Caroline clearly has access to President Trump, as I did, as all of his press secretaries did. But there's no question, whether it was Jen Psaki or Karine Jean-Pierre, that they didn't have access to President Biden. They didn't see him. Nobody did. As a matter of fact, they hid the guy. And so I think that she has two things that were missing the last 4 years. They're going to make her much more successful in that role.